This week on Non-Native Creative, I'm very happy to welcome Sherif Adel to the show. Sherif is an Egyptian dentist and a cartoonist. He's been creating cartoons in Arabic for about 7 years now, and he came to Tokyo a few years ago to work towards his PhD in dentistry. During that time, he started making cartoons in English about his experiences in Japan and in Tokyo and in learning the Japanese language. In this discussion, we talked a lot about his thoughts regarding his move from Cairo to Tokyo, and we also talked a lot about art and the kinds of things that he likes to explore in his work. Make sure to check him out on his social media portals from the links in the description and enjoy this discussion. On this week's episode of Non-Native Creative, I'm very, very excited to welcome Sherif. Sherif is an Egyptian dentist / cartoonist.
Yep.
And he is here to explain how he got to where he is here in Tokyo today, where we're having this discussion, and what got him started on these two maybe very different paths, one of which is obviously very creative. And he's going to share a little bit about his work, some examples. He's brought some examples too. So thank you so much for coming to speak with me today. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me on Non-Native Creatives. And thank you for pronouncing my name exactly correctly.
Woohoo! I remember we had the opportunity to meet several months ago.
Yep.
Through a work project. We were doing a language learning podcast audio series, and I remember you coached me on the correct pronunciation of your name at that time. I locked it in my head of how to say it.
Yeah, it's always nice to hear.
So thanks very much. It's good to chat with you again about something very different this time. Yeah, about your work. I learned after our recording session about your work doing comics.
Yep.
And since then, I just was looking around here and there, seeing your work here and there, and now we finally have the chance to discuss it a bit in depth.
I'm happy to talk about it.
I'm looking forward to that. So I want to start off today's discussion, with the same question that I ask everybody that I'm borrowing from the X-Men, which is to, if you could, please describe or share about what you would consider your origin story, the thing that got you started along this kind of creative path that you're on today. Do you have like an origin point or an origin story?
Yeah, kind of, in a way. And I like the way you phrased that question, as a cartoonist.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
So, yeah, kind of. I always was interested in comics. Since I was a kid, I always used to draw. Like my favorite characters, I was into like comics and video games and cartoons and that kind of stuff. So I was always inspired by the way these characters look and always try to, draw them myself. I made some comics when I was in school. Of course, like very primitive stuff, like about me and my friends, funny situations, stuff like that. But the exact point of origin would be around 7 years ago.
Okay.
And I just finished my master's degree in dental medicine. And at this point, like kind of as a dentist in Egypt, you're on this one-way track. You graduate, you get your bachelor, and then you get your master's, and then you open a clinic and you start working and you get your PhD. It's this one-way track, right? And I felt like I have a lot of stories to tell. I have a lot of humor that I see and I want to portray, and comics felt like the best medium that I can use to tell these stories. And I thought, like, I took a decision to learn and to pursue this kind of I consider it a side career.
Okay.
And that's basically my origin story. I felt like I was on this one railway track and I needed to experience other, parts of life. So basically that was that.
Wow. Okay. So when you first started, like, drawing and starting to do illustrations, then did you know at that time, like, I want to make this a career, or what did you kind of start it as, like, a hobby?
Like I said, since I was a kid, I considered it a hobby, right? And I think when I went to dental school, I basically put it on the side. Like, okay. I basically stopped drawing for a while. And I felt like at that point, like 7 years ago, that's when I decided I want to make something out of it. I want to learn and make something out of it.
Wow, cool. So when you say like I want to learn and like make something out of it, then does that mean that you started actively looking for like publications or ways to like promote your work online, or?
Yeah, basically, like I like the idea of learning by doing. I wanted to first. I started to publish my comics online, and of course at the beginning they weren't so good. And slowly I started to gather an audience and learn, like what people like, what is funny to me, and what is funny to other people, and try to make my art better. So basically, I started online, and during that time, I opened like a Twitter account, Facebook page, and that kind of stuff, and I started publishing these satirical comics. I did some political stuff. I did some like societal stuff, and it's basically all humor, parodies, satire, and that kind of stuff.
So just kind of poking fun at everyday life, or
Exactly.
like the big figures, societal figures.
Exactly.
Okay, and then the work that you've done it's all in Arabic. Has you mentioned to me a little bit before we started that the approach, or rather kind of the understanding of comic books in Egypt is kind of as like an alternative art form. So at that time when you were getting started, what was kind of the response to the comics that you were creating?
Yeah, in a way, like the Egyptian comic scene is much smaller than say America or Japan. It's not really an industry. It's more like individual efforts, and the audience, although they love it, the audience isn't so big, right? And lucky for me, at that time when I started, I'm not sure if you know about the Egyptian revolution that happened in 2011.
Oh, I was not in depth into it,
Yeah.
but I remember hearing about it on the news.
Yeah,
Yes.
without getting into politics, at that time people started paying attention to alternative art.
Okay.
Like graffiti, comics, and stand-up comedy, that kind of stuff. We don't have a big scene for it, but at that time, the attention for those forms of art became bigger. Lucky for me.
I see.
Yeah.
So were those kinds of art kind of being used then as like a way to express the feelings of many different people at that time?
Yeah, exactly.
As
Yeah,
opposed to like taking to the streets and like engaging in like direct political action.
Yeah, like both are parallels, I suppose.
Okay, I see. So that was kind of a nice. Well, I don't want to say nice, but that was the timing was right for for the work that you were doing then.
Yeah.
Okay, and so has your work kind of changed and shifted then in terms of topics over the years?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, like I used to be everyone pretty much was into politics at the time. Now I'm kind of like over it. I don't feel like I want to do any more political stuff.
Okay.
I haven't done for a long while, and I still value comedy. It's the thing I want to write. I feel like I want to make people laugh by reading my stuff.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
So in the comics that you're doing today and recently, they're more focused then on just everyday life.
Yeah.
And like you were showing me a few things earlier about just kind of kind of making fun of bureaucratic systems and like
Exactly.
themes that are very common in probably every country in the world as well too.
Yeah.
So I think that's that's really cool that there's a way like you've created this way, this series actually, to kind of humorously poke fun at the inefficiencies of everyday adult life. Yeah. So then shifting then a little bit, you were doing this. You said about 7 years ago, started doing this, and then eventually, because we're here having this conversation in Tokyo, you came to Japan then. So this is connected to your education then,
Exactly.
right?
Yeah.
So what was the reason that you thought I would like to come to Japan to continue my education?
So many different reasons.
Okay.
Like so many reasons, but basically I visited Japan on a trip with some friends around 4 years ago.
Okay.
And I had a really good experience. I felt like Japan is a country that is so different than all the countries of the world, and specifically different than Egypt, I mean.
Okay.
Like Tokyo and Cairo feels to me like polar opposites.
Oh.
In a sense.
Having never been to Cairo, I know this is like an impossible question, but can you share like an example of something that's like a key difference between Tokyo and Cairo?
Both are very busy cities, right? Both are very heavily, densely populated. But Cairo is much more chaotic, and Tokyo is much more focused on order and rules.
Okay.
Right? But in that system of rules, some humanity is lost, if I may say so.
Okay.
But Cairo is much more warmer than Tokyo, I would say. Like, human relations-wise.
I see.
Yeah.
I see.
So they're very, very different.
Okay. So you kind of have this chaotic city, but there's a lot of warmth and humanity, as opposed to this very, very organized city that kind of gets a bit cold
in a sense.
Distant in some cases. Okay, I understand. So you really had a good experience your first time in Japan.
Yeah, I felt like I need to experience more, and I applied to this university I'm in now, and I'm currently doing my PhD. So I thought it's a good chance to, get my degree, get a better education, and at the same time experience more. And I really like to challenge myself. Like moving to Japan felt like a huge leap of faith, right? Like it felt like a huge step. I'm gonna have to learn Japanese. I'm gonna have to get used to this very new culture to me, and I'm gonna have to learn a lot of new stuff. So that is also one of the reasons. I'm a very easily bored person.
Okay.
So like the monotony of day-to-day life is really affects me negatively.
I see.
And I was at this point that I was ready to make like a new challenge, a huge step into a new direction.
Yeah, because this is a place where every day you're challenged, really.
Exactly, right?
Everybody always says that, I think. Yeah. So this is a good environment for that. Okay, so you've spent the last about 2 years then living and working here.
Yep.
Living and studying here.
Yeah.
Then maybe we can talk first a little bit about the language situation then. So when you first arrived here to do your studies, were you able to speak any Japanese?
Like a very tiny amount. I started learning back in Egypt when I got the acceptance from the university.
Okay.
I started learning around 3 months before my trip, before my flight. So I knew a bit, but I couldn't really speak when I arrived.
Okay.
And then I continued learning here. I'm still learning. Like it's a very difficult language.
Oh, me too. I've been here 10 years. I'm still learning, yeah.
I'm sure you're fluent.
I do okay. But yes, yeah. So the language. Did you have a strong sense of like a language barrier when you first arrived?
Exactly.
Okay.
Like a huge barrier. I felt like, especially that we kind of have the image that Tokyo is like a, how do you say, international city? Kind of like there's a lot of people from all over the world.
Right, yeah.
So you'd expect that many Japanese people speak English, right? Which was not the case, even in universities. So yeah, there was definitely a huge language barrier.
Okay.
But it got better as the more I learned, the more I can communicate, right? And the more life gets easier.
Right. So compared to like thinking back now on when maybe you first arrived, at the beginning of that 2-year period, would you say that there's been a huge change in your language ability?
Yeah, I'm not like where I want to be, but I know a lot more than I used to.
Okay, so like you can take care of like daily tasks and so on in Japanese as well. Yeah. That's very cool. And while you've been here as well, you've made connections in kind of local in the local publication scene, and you've continued to do some comic work here as well. Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about kind of the difference between the comics that you've been creating here in English as opposed to what you were creating before?
Yeah, when I first came, I always like keep mental notes of everything interesting or funny that happens to me, everything I observe, and I think I can, derive humor out of it. And I felt like because it's a new experience, it's a new culture, like we talked about, and there's so many situations that I find humorous. So I wanted to do like a comic diary about my experience and the funny things that happened, the interesting things that I experienced. And I made this comic strip called Gaijin Falafel. So basically, Gaijin Falafel. Gaijin, of course, is like a foreigner in Japanese, and falafel is kind of like a slang word for Egyptian in some countries. So it's the combined, like, two slang words.
I was unaware of that. Like in my American pronunciation, we say falafel, and in Japanese, faraferu. But I think my only association is with the food.
Basically, because it's an Egyptian food, so it's also a slang word for Egyptians, in a way.
Understood. There's a deeper meaning to that. I was not aware.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay.
So like basically it's like a comics diary, and I just tell like different experiences, different funny occasions, and in a way also show the contrast between life in Cairo and life in Tokyo.
Right, through doing that. Yeah, like I had before I met you, I remember I'd seen your comics in Metropolis magazine where they're published about once a month, I think.
Exactly.
And I remember seeing that and going, oh my gosh, when did they get this person that's doing these nice comics? Like, I'd never seen that before.
Yeah.
And then and I was so surprised at how like not it was very different from the usual like expat in Japan approach, because I think a lot of expats in Japan will kind of tend to I'm gonna hurt some people's feelings here, but they'll kind of make like these woe is me stories about things. They'll kind of, and I'm sure I'm guilty of this, I've been guilty of this at some point in time, but they'll kind of be this very like us versus them situation. Whereas your comics are a little bit more like, I'm in this situation and here's just how I'm understanding it right now. Okay.
That's kind of like, humor is kind of in a way, it's a defense mechanism, right?
Sure.
Yeah, like you experience something so, striking, and if you find the humor in it, you can go through it, right? That's how I see it. That's how I see a person, how a person should experience life. So finding humor in these situations is a good way to think about it.
Do you have like I know this is another impossible question, but like a favorite comic that you've created in your time here?
Out of these, maybe the first one. So basically, the very first one was the second day after I arrived, and I was doing all my paperwork in the university, and I was riding the train, and because I'm a foreigner, most Japanese people tend to stare a bit at foreigners. Have you experienced that?
It's common,
yeah. And especially if you're still new, you get to notice it.
Right. I feel like, if you're running around like with a suitcase and a backpack and you kind of have that, the way that you're dressed maybe is indicative of the fact that you're maybe not familiar with the surroundings, then you kind of get a little like glance. I think it's not uncommon.
So basically I was in the train and in a way feeling like people staring, and then I saw like on the train screen it says like, if you see anything suspicious, please contact the blah blah blah. So I thought like, do they think I'm suspicious?
Am I the suspicious thing here?
Right? And then I noticed the absurdity of it. So that's basically.
I've seen that comic. Yeah, it's funny. Like that moment where you glance around, you're like, oh, is it me? Like, am I the suspicious person? Yeah, but that feeling, the feeling fades a little bit over time.
Yeah, definitely.
But every once in a while, you will still get, a kind of concerned look from someone, and
it happens, right?
That part never really goes away. Okay, great. So, and I think maybe we'll talk a little bit more in depth about the comics a little later, because I know you brought them and I would love to be able to show them. Maybe like I can take like a picture or something, so I can edit it into the video. If you're listening to it on podcast, go watch the video if you want to see some pictures.
Please do.
We'll talk about that maybe towards the end then. I want to then, so now that we have kind of a good, I feel, background on who you are and what brought you here, I want to talk a little bit in depth, maybe then, about your experiences, living and living and studying, really, here in another culture, and kind of comparing that to your experiences in Egypt. So you're here working on your PhD, yes. Yep. I was first curious about the experience of a higher education system here in Tokyo as opposed to the education that you experienced in Cairo, or in another city in Egypt, to presume. Yeah. But have you noticed any key differences, whether they're challenging or exciting, about studying in Japan and studying in Tokyo?
It's definitely different. It's definitely has been a challenge, to say the least. And where do I start? But in Cairo, I suppose, for example, when you're doing your degree, in a sense, everything is so clear to you, right? Like what you're supposed to do.
Like you mentioned that track, there are all these steps that you go on.
Yeah. You know what you're supposed to do. You're told what you're supposed to do. In Japan, and I think it's part of the culture, there's kind of an understanding that you should readily know everything.
Yes.
Right?
Yes, and that's a challenge.
And nothing is said. It's all, you're supposed to grasp it, right?
Yeah, you're supposed to read the air, as they say
to read
here.
the air. And it took me quite a while to understand that concept, because Egyptians, and I think many Middle Eastern countries, we're very direct. We're very, if I want to ask a question, I just ask it, right? In Japan, it's quite the opposite. So that's also one of the big, huge differences between, Cairo and Tokyo.
Right.
So it took me quite a while to understand, like what I'm, reading the air, right? And so that's one of the differences. And of course, it's been really nice to study in like a big university with a lot of access to, laboratories and so on. So it's been a very educative experience so far.
That's your point about having to, one, read the air, and two, about the indirectness with which so much of life here occurs. That is a huge challenge. And that continues to be a challenge for me as well, too, even after 10 years now. Knowing the right way to ask something is such a skill that I think that people from more direct countries have a hard time adjusting to.
Yeah, I believe so. And I think there's also, like, the strange part is, even though you're a foreigner, you're also expected to readily know this kind of,
Yeah, or like... also, another thing that I've noticed, you mentioned humor as a defense mechanism. That is huge here. I've noticed sometimes I'll realize I've committed like a social faux pas when someone laughs. So like, for example, I was out with friends one night, and one friend won something. It was some kind of event we were attending. He won like a glass, a mug or something like that. And they were saying like, oh, well, do you want this? Do you want this? And I just said, I don't need it, very directly. And they kind of went, like there was immediately some very nervous laughter, because they had all been saying, oh, I'm okay. And I just directly said, I don't need it. And they were like, I created some discomfort there.
Exactly. Like, it's really hard for us to see like this kind of, you can't say no.
Yeah.
You can say yes. You have to, be in the middle and imply, right?
Yeah.
So it's quite different than
you have to be aware.
Our cultures.
I think. So that's something that continues to be challenging sometimes. Thankfully, like, with making friends, they kind of understand, like, you're being direct, but that's just how you are. So we'll kind of adjust. And those people, bless them, for their understanding. But have you? That's kind of the next thing that I wanted to talk about is, in your time here. Then, have you had the opportunity to make friends, to get
definitely
out in the community and hang out with people?
Yeah, of course. I got a much better understanding about Japanese culture and people, and I can connect to them much more than I at the beginning. And I've made some friends inside and outside of the university. It's been nice.
That's great. That's great. And when you spend time with your friends, then do you use English? Do you use Japanese? Do you
English.
use Arabic?
Basically English.
Some
very basic Japanese. Like I try to talk as much as possible, but yeah.
A total side question, but do you have a chance to use Arabic much here?
Yeah. I also have some friends from Egypt and other Arab countries.
Yeah.
Like, luckily, the university I'm in is kind of international university, so there's a lot of people from different countries, including Egypt and other Arab countries. So I speak Arabic as well.
Yeah, because that's a common topic. Is like a lot of people say like, oh, the expat world in Japan is very small. It's like someone else has said, it's like a small city inside a big city. But I kind of feel like it's very like country and culture driven. Like I've noticed, like it tends to be easiest, of course, to find the people with whom you share a language, right? But so I suppose tend to gravitate towards people from the U.S., from Canada, from New Zealand, maybe from London or whatever, those kinds of countries. But I was kind of curious about the expat or the international student population from Egypt or from.
Yeah, there are some Egyptians. It's not like a huge community. It's still really small numbers, but fortunately for me, I have people that I can talk to in Arabic. So.
Cool. Okay, then maybe so we've talked a little bit about some of like the challenges then of being participating in Japanese society. Is there anything that you found like especially joyful about being here?
Yeah, there's a lot. Joyful. Maybe what's really nice about Japan that as a cartoonist, you can see the appreciation for that kind of art among many people, among the majority of people. For example, I remember the first time I was on the train and I saw like a person, an older person, like maybe 70 years or something, and reading like manga. And that is something you wouldn't see in Egypt at all. So this kind of appreciation for art in general is really something nice to see. And I feel like sequential art is kind of a language here. More than it is like a product. Yeah. So, for example, you notice on the train, in the train stations, you can see like, don't walk beside the edge of the line and so on. You find these instructions sometimes in comics format, like panels and word bubbles and everything.
Sure.
So I feel it like it's something that's like a language that everyone understands and appreciates. So that's something really nice to see.
That's very interesting. I've never heard it phrased that way, as sequential art. But you even see that in like commercials, for example. Like there's one like really popular mobile phone company, SoftBank, and they have like characters. They've built a family into their commercials, and you see like the adventures of the family. And like the dad is a dog, but like like you see the adventures of the family and like the silly things that they experience as they're like advertising for this company. But it becomes like the commercials themselves become a story. But I've never ever thought of it as you just described it, as sequential art. Yeah, that's really interesting.
Yeah. So basically, like what differentiates comics from illustrations or from like cartoons or caricature is the sequential part, like the time being shown to you in panels over the page, and you can freely move back and forward in time. So that's how comics are defined, basically.
Very different from a novel where it's extremely linear.
Yeah. And comics also is different in the sense that it's kind of like the reader participates in the experience, right? Like I said, the panels are laid out, and the ability of the reader to move along the panels and grasp everything is also part of the experience. Unlike, for example, movies, where the watcher is kind of in a passive state, right? Like you watch a movie, your participation is very minimal, right? Like that also serves to the popularity of movies, because everyone loves movies, right? Not everyone loves comics, right?
That's true.
So yeah, in a sense, it's quite different than novels and movies. I feel like it's kind of in a sweet spot between movies and literature.
I see. And so like Japan has obviously a very strong comic book culture, which people of all ages appreciate. There's something for everybody, I can absolutely see how that would be a huge thing.
Like I remember seeing the first bookstore for manga, and it's like 6 floors full of like different genres. That is really nice to see for me. That really makes me happy.
Yeah, it's really cool. Like, and also a lot of people use manga as a study tool, which I think is actually like it's fantastic for me. Like, it's never really drawn me in. Like, I think it's amazing. Like, I've been so impressed like to see if art from this manga artist and like and learning about the process that goes all of the different people that come together to make a manga possible is really, really fascinating to me. Personally, I haven't been super drawn to that, but like the notion of a manga or a comic book as like a language study tool is so fantastic because you have pictures and text together, telling a story, and in some cases over many volumes, and that's such a good opportunity for people to be able to pair, vocabulary words together with emotions in a way that they can't do with textbooks.
Exactly.
So I think like that's one of those things that I thought was just something really special and interesting about comics and manga. By the way, have you, since you've been here, have you picked up any Japanese manga or even in English?
Yeah, I have like a large collection of English manga, even back in Egypt, and I've picked some here. But the ones in Japanese are like really like Doraemon.
Yeah.
That's what I can read at this point.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah, I was doing that. I think the ones, do you know Crayon Shin-Chan?
Oh, yeah.
I picked up a couple volumes of that many, many years ago when I was thinking to study. If you're not familiar with the series, listeners or viewers, Crayon Shin-Chan is a manga series following the mischievous life of a very young boy. He's maybe 4 or 5.
I think so.
I don't remember. But there's all kinds of just stuff that ranges from goofy to fantastical to very serious. So there's such a wide range of stuff that's available. All right, fantastic. Let's see. Maybe just to make sure that we have enough time, we can take a look at a couple of things.
Yeah, sure.
A couple of things that you brought.
Yeah. So basically, like I told you, when I first started, I did like these, basically a webcomic, and they were not like connected. It was just like different jokes, different parodies of certain stuff. But my main goal was to create like a connected story over several issues with like iconic or relatable characters that people can associate with or like or hate or so on. So that was like my main goal at the time. And I did this magazine called Tfut Alina Bukra in Arabic. In English it means pass by tomorrow or like drop by tomorrow. And it's kind of a sci-fi comedy imagining Egypt in the future, and there's an alien invasion, and there's like a group of a team of specialists who are supposed to defend the country and the world from this invasion. And it's really satirical. Yep.
So, okay, for those of you who are just listening, I'm flipping through the pages of the comic right now, and I'm looking at, this is the first volume?
This is the first issue.
The first issue that I'm looking at. And yes, it is, there's a familiar looking human on the front of the comic, but as soon as you get to the first page, it's aliens having a conversation, I presume, about invading the
exactly.
country.
Exactly. According to the prophecy. So, back to the cover.
Yeah.
So, basically, he is the main character, and you can sense what he's about from what he's doing. He's using a laser gun to light his cigarette.
Very smart.
Yeah.
As you do.
So basically, this is like what I'm trying to say. Like for the future to be good, we need to like change some certain aspects, right? Of our how we deal with things, how we deal with science, how we deal with that kind of stuff.
Right. And so this is one of the guy on the cover here. It's one of the specialists that you mentioned.
Yeah, he's like the leader.
Charge.
Yeah.
Right, but he doesn't seem to on our first glance, he doesn't seem to be a person who makes the best choices.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's kind of a theme then with the other main characters that we follow throughout the series. So you shared a little bit with me earlier about some of the other people. There are 4 people total in the team in the series that you created. So this is the back cover of another one.
I think third issue.
The third issue. Yeah. So looking at the cover, so we have the same. There are four people that are four characters, I guess, on this team. That we have like the first guy that we saw on the on the cover, and then there's a young woman and a donkey and what appears to be an old man.
Like a cyborg.
Oh, this is a cyborg. Yeah. Okay, and so. You told me a little bit about the reason that you created this donkey character.
Yeah,
too.
so he's my favorite character.
Okay.
So his name is Nagib, and he's like a genetically modified donkey, designed to be like super intelligent.
Okay.
And basically, he's the only intelligent character in the team.
I like that he's smoking a pipe and he's wearing glasses too.
Yeah. So basically, in Arabic, donkey is kind of like an insult. It kind of means idiot.
Well, I guess we actually have that in English too, ass.
Yeah, I suppose.
Yeah, calling someone an ass, refers to that. Yeah. So, okay.
So that's where the irony comes from.
Got it. So he's the smartest in
and
the group.
No one listens to him.
I hate it when I'm that guy. I hate being that guy. That's happened to all of us, I'm sure. Cool. So the series, how many issues?
6 issues.
6 issues are in this series. That's very cool. So is this something that people can read online, or was this something that's published, just the physical version?
Like we had the published version, and we had like a digital version on an app in Egypt called Kutubna. So it's also available digitally.
Okay, cool. Well. And this is Arabic only, so for those of you who want to boost your Arabic skills, you can do that. You can do that. And then you also have some other stuff. You brought quite a stack of things.
Yeah. This is also the same series.
Okay, this is the same series.
This is called another project called Manga, which is kind of like a collaborative project between me and a friend Ali Galal, who passed away last year.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that.
Yeah, thank you. And it's kind of we attempted to make like a parody of manga. Not necessarily a parody of manga, but like using the manga format to tell Egyptian stories.
Oh, that's interesting. What's for a comic book noob like me? When you say the manga format, is there something that's different from this comic approach that you've used here?
That's like art style wise, like maybe the thin line art and the screen tones, but I use them here too. But yeah, and like some of the effects.
Okay.
That kind of.
I see. So kind of like more stylistic choices that were similar to manga. I see. As opposed to the style that you were using for these other ones then. So this was a collaborative effort.
Yeah.
Is that something that you often do, collaborating with other artists to produce new works?
I collaborated around 3 times so far.
Usually to create some like a comic book, something like this?
Yeah.
That's cool. So are you working with other artists to like produce other like parodies for your collaborations, or?
Sometimes, like for example, for this series, there's a chapter that was made by a friend, Ahmed Rafat. He's a cartoonist, an Egyptian cartoonist living in the UK, and his style is very serious, more like DC style, like much more realistic and a bit serious and heavy in style, right? So. We collaborated on him telling a story. So basically, this character, who's the cyborg, he's kind of not so honest character.
Okay.
Like he likes to exaggerate and to make up stories. So he's telling the other characters how he lost his arm, and when he tells the story, the style changes to Ahmed Rafat's art, which is very serious, to tell like this over the top story about him fighting in a war and being on a plane and having to cut his arm off to get freed from the explosion, and this kind of like very heavy story,
right?
And then in the end the other character comes in and you're telling them about your arm and how you lost it while driving a car, like a really silly reason to lose an arm, right?
Okay, but he's telling a fantastic story.
Exactly.
So you created this shift in the artwork itself to emphasize how like fantastic and ridiculous the whole thing was. Oh, that's really cool. That's something that you can't do with text.
Yes, exactly. That's one of the strong points about comics, I would say.
Yeah, that's something that's really interesting. And then total tangent here, complete tangent here. But have you seen, for example, I've talked about this. This is now the second time I've talked about this on this podcast. But that Spider-Man movie that came out like a year or two ago.
No, Into the Spider-Verse.
That's it, Into the Spider-Verse. It was like this really, really cool integration
so good.
of comic book-esque storytelling, but in the movie, in the framework of a movie. I was blown away
really
by the way that they put that together. And I've heard nothing but positive things from everybody related to visual media about that.
It was one of my favorites. And I'm actually, at a certain point around 3 years ago, I stopped watching superhero movies. Even though I love comics, I love DC and Marvel comics, but I feel like this kind of like the Marvel and DC cinematic universes, it's not for me. I feel like it's too repetitive and too, draining. And for me, I don't enjoy it anymore. But the exception I made was for this movie because it's completely different. It's so artistic, so well done on so many levels.
Yeah, that was one of the only ones that I have gone to see and that really, really struck me in recent memory. Because you grow up as a kid watching superhero movies. It's fun. It's kind of a fantastic story. But I guess for me, it was like... I too haven't really been watching the superhero movies very much. I kind of want to, but it seems to me that there's such a strong fandom around it, and it's like if you haven't been following the series, then you can't jump into this most recent one. Is what I hear. So
I suppose
it's kind of I don't know. It's
for me, it's the
fun for
repetition. I feel like I'm watching the same thing over and over again. Right. For me, that's
I look forward to your comments.
I think I'm saying something very controversial.
I know we're gonna get so many comments on this. Like, I can't believe you guys don't watch the Marvel movies. That's too bad.
But no, I'm happy for people who like it.
Of course. Like, it's not that I dislike it either. It's just that I guess I just end up using my time in other ways. They're fun to watch now. Anyway, I'm getting horribly off topic. I wanted to continue on to the other things. So you brought a couple samples of the English work. That you've been doing during your time in Japan.
So basically, I was walking with a friend, half Egyptian friend, Ibrahim Yusuf. He's also an artist, and we were walking in Japan. He lived here for a while, and he told me, check out this magazine. It's the best English-speaking magazine in Japan.
High praise.
So I got an issue, and then I saw that they have like a comics section. So then I contacted them, and sent some of my work and proposed the idea for this. So usually when I start, like even with Fut Alina Bukra, I usually when I pitch an idea, I usually prefer to have like a complete sample. So when I pitched this magazine, I had the first issue completely done, and I showed it to the media funding agency. And in this case, I also had like the first one to show, right? And then they invited me over, and we had a nice talk, and we agreed on how things would work. And I think I published 19 comic strips.
Wow, that's great. That's great. Yeah, like I remember, like I said, I'd seen it here and there, and I was so interested at the vibe of it, how different it was from the kind of harsh, the harsher kind of takes that I'd seen. Critical, or less focused on the comics, and kind of like the jokes that I usually see because I think the community of expats coming from Western, like from Canada, from the US, from like London, England, stuff like that, Australia, I feel like there's a larger community of people from those countries, and as a result, like we have more of their perspectives, and so maybe more it's more direct and a little more argumentative, like the kinds of humor and like observational art that comes out. So I remember being kind of like, like this is just more like, this is an experience I had that was kind of gently humorous, and I remember thinking, oh, that's so different from what I'd seen before, and it was I enjoyed it. And like I told you before, but like for anybody who wants to check out do you have I'll do that at the end. For anybody that wants to to take a look, you can find the English and Arabic samples of his work online. But the one comic that you created for this series that I think so many people who have ever studied another language, I told you about this earlier, could appreciate. There was one that you did that you use censor bars, if that's the right word, to show the progress over time of your language learning, of your Japanese language learning. And you were using speech bubbles, but inside the speech bubbles were just like censorship bars to show all of these different things that you couldn't understand. And then over time, like you would start to be able to understand a word here and there. And so you'd let that appear in the speech bubbles. I just thought that was wonderful. I loved that.
Thank you. I'm happy you like it.
Yeah, I really liked that.
It's based on a true story.
For all of us, I think. Yeah. So I thought that was a really great way to kind of show what it's like to not to be in a place where you don't understand everything that's going on around you. It was a really cool I thought way to interpret the experience. Yeah. So I like that a lot, and I hope other people can take a look at that. But we're running close to the end of our time, so I want to kind of finish up with a couple of maybe more forward-thinking questions. I want to ask if you, I'm not sure how much longer you plan on being in Japan, but maybe what's kind of the next thing that's coming up for you in terms of, like creativity and creative projects? Do you see yourself continuing to do comic work in English and in Arabic, or maybe in Japanese? I don't know.
In Japanese would be a bit difficult, I suppose.
Tricky.
Maybe one day, maybe in the future. I hope so. But for Gaijin Falafel, I feel like I want to add newer comic strips, add new strips, and like collect it in a graphic novel or like a small book.
Cool.
So basically, I want to do that and pitch it to publishers. So that is one of the projects I would like to see happen.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah. And that's about it.
That's about it? Okay. And then if people would like to find you online, where can they do that? Where do you have social media presences?
Yeah, I'm on Twitter. Basically, I'm on Twitter all day.
That's impressive.
Pretty much. Twitter is my favorite. I stopped using Facebook at all.
Okay.
So basically Twitter and Instagram. So it's at Barbatos. Okay.
What's the name? What does the name mean?
It's a funny Arabic word that kind of hard to explain, but like the onesie that babies wear.
Yes.
So basically, it's a really funny word that's not so common to hear in Egyptian Arabic, meaning this thing.
Okay.
So it just sounds funny.
It's just a funny word.
Yeah.
Okay. I will accept that.
Yeah.
I too, as a fan of funny words, I will accept that then. So we can find you on Twitter at Barbatos. Sorry, my pronunciation. And do you use like Instagram to share your comics?
So I have like two, one for Barbatos and one for like Gaijin Falafel as well.
Okay. So the Gaijin Falafel one is just Instagram, like at Gaijin Falafel. Okay.
Yeah, one word.
I'll put links to all of these in the podcast description and the YouTube description as well.
Sounds good.
So everybody should go and check out his really cool work there, and keep an eye out, hopefully, for a book of Gaijin Falafel.
Yeah, I hope so.
Sometime coming to a publisher near you in the future.
Yeah.
That would be very cool. Well, I will wrap it up here unless you have any other comments that you just can't wait to get out.
Not really. I'm very happy to have this talk, and I'm happy to be here on Non-Native Creative.
Thank you so much for coming. I really appreciate it.
It's such a cool show.
Oh, that's so cool.
I'm really a big fan of the word, of the title.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, it sounds good.
I'm happy to hear that. It communicates, I hope, the aims of the show, and it also, I feel like, represents the people. We can also consider the people who come to visit the show as non-native creatives, but it's also an idea as well.
Yes.
So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for
an interesting discussion. I really enjoyed this.
Yeah, me too.
Great. Thanks so much for watching this episode of Non-Native Creative. If you liked this episode, please make sure to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Feel free to leave comments about this episode in the comment section too. Please make sure to stop by the project Patreon at patreon.com/nonnativeCreative. Patrons can get access to Patreon-only discussions, bonus behind-the-scenes media, interview transcripts, and access to patron-only live streams. Your support will help make sure the series can continue to share exciting, interesting stories from creative people working across borders. Thanks again for watching. See you next week.